So how do we actually build inner resilience? What is real inner resilience? What's what we can call fake inner resilience? And how can you actually build an inner resilience that's authentic to you? So you don't feel like you're following all of these roadmaps and all of these blueprints, which kind of give you an idea of what being a resilient individual actually looks like, versus actually coming to the fruition of your own journey and finding what your version of that looks through. So my name is Aaron, in case you don't know. I run a shadow work consulting business that doubles up as a conscious coaching business. I say conscious because shadow work is mainly working with the unconscious mind, with unresolved shadows. And we go in, we heal those, we help make sure everything's okay. And then there's the conscious element of coaching, which also takes place. So I got inspired actually to do this just from seeing a lot of the state of the market that this kind of niche, this coaching niche or this shadow work niche or this self-development niche is in. So I followed that, and essentially what I want to talk to you about, like I just said, is about the misconceptions about what emotional resilience and inner resilience actually is. That's the main topic of this video that I think is most important. Because a lot of people, a lot of guys especially actually, definitely a lot of my clients get first involved in stoicism and the more stoic attitudes and the more stoic practices of Eastern traditions, actually, Buddhism and Hinduism. That's kind of what they is the gateway drug into all of this. And it says a lot of good things. It says that we don't have to be reactive to our emotions. We don't have to be reactive to our thoughts. We can be stoic, we can be steadfast, and we can just get on with life even if it's tough. And this is all good things. And then like the Buddhist kind of, the westernized bastardization of this. And I don't say bastardization in like a bad way or a mean way. It's just like a dumbing down, let's say. It's kind of focusing on all the Buddha's non-attachment teachings and detachment from the world and all that kind of good stuff. Or not good stuff, but we'll get into that too. And what you end up in, to coin a phrase that actually my long-term mentor, Pierre de Souza, first came up with, from who I heard it from, was you just end up being an emotionally constipated robot, which is what a lot of spiritual teachers and followers, unfortunately, go through. And also a lot of the kind of always in therapy people too. They kind of they kind of vary. They go from emotionally constipated robot to too emotional. And when I say too emotional, I don't mean that somebody in there being very emotional is too emotional. That's not what that means. Too emotional means being very much in your emotions and being very reactive to them and letting that dictate your life, rather than you realizing that you are the awareness that these emotions exist within, not the other way around, right? That can be a whole separate video. So inner resilience, a lot of the time, and I work mainly with guys, I work with women as well, but I work mainly with guys, so I'm coming at it from a little bit of a skewed perspective. A lot of it talks about basically just a fancy way of saying suppression or repression. Now, suppression and repression are not bad. I want you to take the words bad and good when you're watching these videos out of your vocabulary, because they can be quite damaging in a certain sense, right? The sense that I'm talking about is because, like we're just talking about now, suppression and repression gets a bad rap, like, oh, you're repressing this is bad, okay? Let's say I get really angry, but I'm in a public place. Worse than that, I'm at a job. Let's imagine that I don't have my own business, or I'm not working for myself. I work for a boss and I get really angry, I get triggered at something. Let's say somebody asks me to make them a coffee. And they say it really nicely, but for whatever reason, boom, that just triggers me into something which is really, reminds me of like every time that, I don't know, my stepmother or stepfather used to make me perform in front of other family members, right? I get super triggered and angry. If I wasn't to repress or suppress that anger, I would probably end up punching a colleague or my boss in the face, or getting super angry, or getting super frustrated and alienating myself from everyone at work, right? So you have to use repression. Repression is healthy when it's used in this way, right? When you're like, oh, okay, I'm angry right now. I don't really have the resources to deal with this now. Let me just push this down a little bit, because it's very functional, right? I actually first got this idea, or this concept first opened up to me by Dr. Suzanne Cook-Reuter, who's a world-renowned, not therapist, developmental psychologist. You can read her papers. I very much recommend you to do that, where she studies people's development at different levels. And one of the higher marks of development is someone who's able to use repression as a healthy tool, right? Or someone who uses repression in this kind of a healthy way, right? I'm not talking about it in that context. I'm talking about it basically in the context of not allowing yourself to feel the full spectrum of emotions and viewing emotions or emotionality as bad or wrong, okay? This gets a whole section of your intelligence gone. We have thoughts, the mental intelligence, then we have the emotions, the emotional intelligence. One is not better than the other. They're different. So it's also not saying that, oh, emotions are king, emotions are queen. No, they're just emotions, they're just feelings. And they can give us little hints of intelligence that maybe our mind can't pick up on. If you want to categorize it that way, you can categorize it in a different way if you want to. But we're also not here to build emotions into something that they're not, okay? If you see someone saying that, that's okay. Most likely it's because they've just come out of a phase where they've used their head a lot, and now they're overcorrecting and they're using their feelings a lot, right? It's basically the same blind spot, just in a different context, okay? So the Stoics, they repress a lot of emotions, or Stoicism represses a lot of emotions, and it also makes everything a big deal, okay? It makes it a big deal that you're suffering. It makes it a big deal that the world is hard or that there's pain, right? Which then makes a storyline about it. And whenever you make a storyline about something, that is when you become attached to something, okay? And when you become attached to something, that is when suffering is created, right? Now, if this sounds familiar, it's because I didn't come up with this. This is Buddhist Dharma, Buddhist theory, right? Applied to a more therapeutic or Western psychology kind of lens. So if the misconception here is there's the Stoicism misconception, is there another misconception here about what inner resiliency is? Well, it's also not going the other way, which is kind of lying down, being accepting, turn the other cheek, so to speak, right? To the point where you're just becoming a doormat. For those of you who don't know what a doormat is, it's basically an expression in English where you kind of are a pushover, right? You're easy to control, easy to dominate, or easy to, yeah, you just become someone who's very weak, right? This is often mistaken to a lot of to resiliency as well, where people go the other way and they think that this is, being holier than thou, kind of following in maybe, I don't know, maybe Jesus's footsteps, or becoming a pacifist and all this kind of stuff. If you want to do that for spiritual reasons, go ahead, or any other reasons, you can do whatever you want. But that's also not resiliency, because a lot of these people do that because they don't have the courage to actually stand up for themselves, to actually go after what they want, right? So it's actually a form of spiritual bypassing, where you don't have to go through that hard part where you learn how to set boundaries, you learn how to have boundaries within yourself, you learn how to go after actually what you want, you learn how to fail, even after going after something that you want. You just get to skip all of that hustle, and you get to go straight to the, oh no, I'm just, chilling, it's fine. You can do whatever you want, I just turn the other cheek, right? You have to integrate that first in order for it to be something that you actually let go of. Then that becomes resilient. So I actually got this from an anime, which is a Japanese animated show called Vinland Saga. I watched this ages ago. And basically, the main character's dad, Thors, is like this legendary warrior. But he's peaceful. The whole time his son is alive, he's peaceful and he doesn't fight. And, his son Thorfinn, hears all the legends of his stories, and one time he even goes to steal or look at his father's sword, and his father catches him. And Thorfinn's like, oh, but I want to have a sword too, father. And his father, Thors, is like, well, a sword is a tool to kill someone's enemies. Do you have enemies? No one has enemies. Do you want to have enemies? And it's very different, a warrior who was maybe someone who was one in 1,000 generations, right? A warrior of 1,000 generations in terms of his ability, his skill, to say that and to come to that level of peace and not commit violence, versus somebody who's never been in that world and never really had the courage to be in that world, whether it's that or in business or in sports or whatever. to then go and take that position. It's very different because the context is different, and also because the experience is different. The experience of life is different. The insight someone has gained is different. The level of wisdom of someone is different because they've been through that path, right? And it culminates to this moment where Thor basically says to his son, a true warrior doesn't need a sword. So it's not so much that this side being a pacifist or kind of being a pushover or this kind of stuff isn't resilience. Of course it is. But you have to be very careful that you're not disowning anything. You're not bypassing anything. You haven't tried to get away from something because it's difficult and you're just deluding yourself into doing it because you're coming from a higher plane, right? So now that we got that out of the way, the second part of this is, well, I'm no longer confused about what inner resilience is in terms of the bad, the stuff that isn't relevant. But what actually is inner resilience? So again, I got this from one of my mentors, Pierre D'Souza, who I mention all the time, who first made this distinction to me somewhat recently, actually, a few months ago. But it was something which I kind of embodied, I kind of understood, but until it was laid out like this, I couldn't really explain it, right? When you're working with a client, there's two different areas that you can really look for when you look for honest feedback of how they're doing and is the coaching actually working for them, and if it's not, how can we change things, right? The first one is getting rid of the actual trigger. Let's say someone just always gets triggered by their romantic partner. Is that trigger still coming up, yes or no? If the answer is no, it's working. If the answer is yes, then, still needs some more work to do. And then obviously there's some stuff in the middle as well. However, there's a second one, which is actually the most important and the absolute key for building authentic inner resilience, which is when the trigger comes up, are you, or is the client, or is the person still okay with themselves? And that's the key right there. That's the principle. Are you okay with being triggered? Do you not get triggered at the fact that you were triggered? Because if the answer to that is yes, I don't, then you can never actually be in a bad state. You can never actually be in a downward spiral. You can never actually be X, Y, and Z in a bad mood or be worried about getting triggered or even be triggered, because your meta level, I say meta all the time, meta just means big picture, right? Your big picture principle is I'm okay with not being okay. Then by definition, you can never not be okay. And this is the big one. This is actually the big one, which is most important when it comes to, lifelong coaching or lifelong therapy, because that's something that can be developed in one area, in multiple areas, in life in general, right? And that's the most important there. And this looks different for everyone. You see how this gives so much room and so much space for someone's own authenticity and personality to fill that space, right? Because it's no longer like, to be unreactive, you have to be unreactive, to be unreactive, you need to make sure that all parts of your body are relaxed, your mind is relaxed. Every time you see a thought, you have to go back to it and gently make it come back and back into center. You also have to be grounded in yourself. Maybe you can do some breathing, blah, 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 blah. There's all this kind of stuff, right? Which just makes you super robotic because you can't actually be in the moment. You're having to do mini renunciations of the world every single time, because you're not just being here in the moment. But if you're here in the moment and you're okay with being triggered, whilst still being triggered, like you still have that feeling of being triggered or being insecure or whatever, but you're okay with that. Now, suddenly, your own being, your own person just flows through from that. Maybe somebody is just really calm. Maybe somebody else shows their emotion, is very expressive, but in a very light-hearted, fun way, right? Rather than being all serious and taking it all serious and taking it all personally. Maybe someone else is someone in the middle. Maybe someone else is just angry, but is able to own that and be like, hey guys, I'm just really angry right now. I'll go and take a walk and I'll be back, right? And it's said like that. It's said with no extra charge, than emotional charge than needed. That is what true inner resiliency is building that. So How do we get there? Well, when I work with clients, we usually tend to start off with shadow issues or very specific instances, whether it's around money, or I have someone who's wants to express themselves on camera. They already have a good business going, but they want to get better at just being off the cuff, kind of like this, and talking to the audience. Someone wants to do that. Maybe there's some other people who want to find a bit more adventure in their life. So it can be esoteric, it can be very simple. I have another client who just wants to get better at, you know, following up and being more on top of things for their partner, and then all this kind of stuff, right? We start off with that, and that will lead us to this big picture of being okay with not being okay. Because you have enough instances where you heal the instances where you get triggered, that suddenly the immediate problems go, but you still have the big existential issues going on, right? Whether it's like fear of death or some kind of manifestation of fear of death, or not being accepted, not being loved, all that kind of stuff, right? And it's by working on those ones, first you work on the smaller ones, then these ones, that allows your mind to get used to just the idea that no matter what, you're okay with being who you are, right? So it's also about working, when I work with clients, it's also about working on the fact that, yes, we can do all this self-actualization stuff, and it does actually make you better, but you were always good enough to begin with, right? That's also very important to include. So you work unconsciously, and then you also work consciously, which is giving your mind the right frameworks, like reading about, if you want to read about some development stuff, or just therapeutic extra reading, that kind of thing. It's also about making sure your conscious mind is developing too, so it isn't just left behind or seen as useless or something like that. So you want to make sure that you got the unconscious, the conscious, and so with the conscious stuff, let me just add a little bit of context in there. What that means is, if you educate your conscious mind, it also means that you'll cognitively, and cognition is still super important for healing, right? It's not just with emotions or symbolism. Cognition is still super important for healing, like the very logical part of that. If that's on your side, and you can understand what resilience actually is, like this kind of video is actually educating you, then it gives you a kind of a framework to work towards and to fall back to. And sometimes for some people, emotions is something that they fall back to. Other people it's symbolism, other people it's looking at systems. For some people, it's more being more logically based. Their logic is their safe space. So sometimes we can utilize that, and we can use that to help. So in conclusion, the unconscious work, the shadow work, which I have a full playlist free on this channel, which I advise you to go and watch. If you don't want to work with me quite yet, go and watch that. You make sure that you're unconsciously, you get rid of a lot of the immediate triggers that are really at the top of your mind, so that you can open up, a bit more of the bigger picture, being okay with not being okay kind of questions. Because if you don't work on the immediate stuff straight away, they just take so much attention and so much time that it'll be hard to dive into this. You do that, and then you can, through the skills that you learn through that, and you get better at, because it is a skill, getting better at healing, right? You can then apply that to a bigger, more esoterical picture, like being okay with not being okay. And then there's the conscious part, which is why I'm making these videos, which is the education, the psychoeducation, which is something my other mentor, James Tripp, used to say all the time, which is a great phrase, psychoeducation, right? Which is when you educate your psychology through psychological education, right? You do all of that so that your mind has a framework to follow. And you can logically understand something even when you're triggered, because that can be quite comforting, actually. You can be like, no, I'm just triggered. I need to go through this. I need to go through that, right? And then you put those two together, and then you allow however your expression is to come up in those moments to just come up. Whatever your resiliency takes the form of through different life experience. Maybe it's you can be really calm. Maybe it's to actually own your emotions. Maybe it's to be kind of playful and lighthearted with them. Maybe it's to be this, maybe it's to be that, right? I'm lucky to have a lot of friends that are advanced at this, and little mentors that are advanced at this. They all express inner resiliency differently. The main point of this video is not to copy what the 3-step, 5-step stuff that so many people talk about on YouTube or on other apps, right? where you're kind of doing, it's kind of working, but it's kind of not. You're kind of in that limbo because on the one hand, you understand what they're saying, but because they don't understand the principles behind everything, you just end up either being like them or being an emotionally constipated robot, right? Like with stoicism and all this kind of stuff, and certain sects of really hardcore Buddhist insight practice. Definitely more on the more Western side. You just allow yourself to work on the principle of being okay with not being okay through the education I've given you here, and also through working on it in a shadow work perspective, which is in the playlist. And then you can actually see what your authentic inner resiliency is. Okay. So like I said, if you do want to do some one-on-one work or just have a chat, then I have my link below. I don't do hard sales. I don't do super hard closing. It'll just be a chat to see where you are and where you want to go and if I can help you. If you're not ready for that, use my resources. I have playlists now that are coming out. I have videos like this coming out 2 times a week. I'm going to get it up to 3 times a week as well pretty soon. And you can just follow my content there. And if you want, you can subscribe and like if you enjoy the video. The main thing is you get back to me in the comments and you ask me questions. And you, after following the advice and doing the practices, because I'm filming videos now, free videos, basically free coaching, right? That I will do in response to your questions. And I will upload them, put them in the playlist, and I'll write you in the comment and I'll tag you in that video, right? That's if you're not ready for, one-on-one coaching, because there is a limit to how much those videos will help you about actually talking to you face to face, right? But for now, that's the video on inner resiliency. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll see you soon.